Dev's movie log. Damn it! Kurt's movie log, tape 7, date July 5th, 1980. Universal Classic Monsters ranked. What is a monster? Is it something that hides under the bed and serves as a metaphor for fears and anxiety? Yes, but let's go deeper. Is it a human who dedicates his life to bring pain and suffering upon others? Well, yes, but too deep. Or is it a type of grotesque creature whose appearance frightens and whose powers threaten the human world? Also yes, and we're gonna stick with this interpretation. Now that we've dealt with the monster part of this tape's title, let's move to the universal part of it. Monsters were a part of cinema since London was a part of England from the beginning. But before every shared universe we know today, there was Universal Classic Monsters. Universal Pictures even have the word universe in their name. They've made over 30 films and delivered thousands of nightmares to people around the world. Since my bedtime was constantly ruined by some of the monsters on this list, I think I'm ready to face my childhood fears. This ranking stands on 5 pillars, 2 points each, 10 points in total. First pillar, legend. I'm a big fan of origins, and some monsters have bloody amazing backstories. Second pillar, scarometer. If you want to make it in a horror world, you gotta have the looks, man, it's crucial. Third pillar, abilities. Additional powers can only boost your career as an evildoer. Fourth pillar, evilometer. A successful monster is also a successful villain. And fifth pillar, verdict. It is simply my personal opinion about the monster. And now some underground rules. You're gonna be at least a monster or a villain to be on this list, so no Quasimodo. My man Greg was right about this one. There's only room for one monster of its kind, so no brides, daughters, or she-somethings. We're gonna be dead serious here, so no Abbott and Costello bullshit. And finally, the following is not gonna be based on Universal Classics only. 2 reasons. 1. If the novel, a majority based on novels, has more depth or a better explanation of certain things, I can't disrespect the origin. And 2. Filmmakers back then were extremely limited in visual department, and I wanna rank the monsters as if they were encountered in real life. Abandon all hope, ye who enter here. Last spot and number 8 is the Phantom, also known as Eric. The Phantom comes from the pages of The Phantom of the Opera from 1910. It's a French novel written by Gaston Leroux. He appears in Universal Classic Monsters, or simply UCM, twice. In The Phantom of the Opera from 1925 and Phantom of the Opera from 1943. We're gonna talk about Lon Chaney version. From the film we learned that the Phantom had escaped as a prisoner from Devil's Island, which is not enough to earn any points for backstory. But from the novel we learned that he was deformed from birth and was the son of a construction business owner. He wandered the world and started building trick palaces, returned to France and built the Opera House with hidden passages in a secret lair. Now that is something I can work with. Regarding his appearance, I think he is very disturbing and bears resemblance to the Red Skull from Marvel Comics. Since building an opera house is not a superhuman ability, I'm gonna say he has none. As for weaknesses, he has all of them, cause he's only human. The Phantom is a troubled romantic. He may drown you or hang you, but he won't go out of his way just for the sake of evil. My biggest problem with this character is that he's just a villain on the monster list. He gets 1 out of 2 for legend, 1 out of 2 for scarometer, 0 out of 2 for abilities, 1 out of 2 for evilometer, and 0 out of 2 for verdict. Overall, the Phantom gets 3 out of 10 and rests at number 8. Number 7 is the Invisible Man, also known as Dr. Jack Griffin. The Invisible Man comes from the pages of, surprise surprise, The Invisible Man from 1897. It's an English novel written by Herbert George Wells. Oh, wait, let me fix that real quick. There, much better. There are lots of Invisible sequels in UCM, but they either have Jack Griffin's relatives or totally non-related people. So the only film we can rely on is The Invisible Man from 1933, from which we learned that Dr. Jack Griffin is a chemist who has invented the invisibility formula. He achieved that by experimenting with an obscure drug called monocaine. Unaware that this drug is extremely dangerous and made a dog mad in Germany, he becomes seriously unhinged. That's quite a simple and popular hustle, but it just works. Can something you don't see be scary? Absolutely. Your imagination can drive you insane without any monsters. Can someone you don't see be scary? Yes, but if you know it's a human, your mind starts to work differently. Invisibility is an awesome superhuman power, but when you're not Fantastic Four's Invisible Woman from Marvel Comics, it's just not the same. The Invisible Man is a true psychopath. He's probably the most evil motherfucker here. He will kill you as a part of his Reign of Terror program. I have the same problem with him I had with the Phantom. The only difference is he's a great villain on the monster list. He gets 1 out of 2 for Legend, 1 out of 2 for Scarometer, 1 out of 2 for Abilities, 2 out of 2 for Evilometer, and 0 out of 2 for Verdict. Overall, the Invisible Man gets 5 out of 10 and lands at number 7. Number 6 is Frankenstein's Monster. Frankenstein's Monster comes from the pages of Frankenstein, or The Modern Prometheus from 1818. It's an English novel written by Mary Shelley. He appears in UCM 7 times. In Frankenstein from 1931, Bride of Frankenstein from 1935, Son of Frankenstein from 1939, and The Ghost of Frankenstein from 1942. And then in Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman from 1943, House of Frankenstein from 1944, and House of Dracula from 1945. Obviously, the original film has the most to offer, from which we learned that Frankenstein's monster was assembled by, spoiler alert, Henry Frankenstein and his hunchbacked assistant. Some of the parts were stolen from fresh corpses in a cemetery, and some come from corpses of recently hanged criminals. Using an opening at the top of the tower, the creature was exposed to the lightning, which gave him life. It's alive! It's alive! It's alive! This is hands down the best backstory in UCM. The monster is a behemoth with pale skin, stitches all over his body, 2 balls in the neck, and a square head, so yeah, pretty unsettling. Abilities: superhuman strength and immortality. Weaknesses: fire. Frankenstein's monster is a victim of circumstance and the least evil fellow on this list. He may strangle you, but only because you started it, or drown you by accident. I mean, if you can't swim, it's your problem. He's iconic, and the reason he is so low here is because he's almost a good guy. He gets 2 out of 2 for Legend, 1 out of 2 for Scarometer, 1 out of 2 for Abilities, 0 out of 2 for Evilometer, and 1 out of 2 for Verdict. Overall, Frankenstein's monster gets 5 out of 10 and sits at number 6. Number 5 is the Gilman. Unlike most of the monsters, the Gilman comes from the pages of screenwriters and appears in UCM 3 times. In Creature from the Black Lagoon from 1954, Revenge of the Creature from 1955, and The Creature Walks Among Us from 1956. We're gonna use the first entry as a reference, from which we learn that the Gilman is a piscine amphibious humanoid and a living member of an ancient species from the Devonian period, whose ancestors' remains were uncovered in the Amazon, which provided a direct link between land and sea animals. So basically, it's a horror version and a more grounded version of Aquaman from DC Comics. The Gilman is half fish, half man, but not the way Merman is. Fish is not the scariest thing to be a part of, but any mutations can send you running. Abilities: amphibious nature, superhuman strength, and superhuman swimming, I guess. Is that a thing? Weaknesses: standard, I'd say. Blunt objects, cold weapons, bullets. The Gilman is partially animalistic, consequently territorial. He may tear you to pieces, but until you stay away from the Black Lagoon, you'll be safe. He was the last UCM's creation. While definitely not the worst, he is still half fish. He gets 1 out of 2 for Legend, 1 out of 2 for Scarometer, 1 out of 2 for Abilities, 1 out of 2 for Evilometer, and 1 out of 2 for Verdict. Overall, the Gilman gets 5 out of 10 and drifts to number 5. Number 4 is Count Dracula. Count Dracula comes from the pages of Dracula from 1897. It's an English novel written by Bram Stoker. He appears in UCM 3 times. In Dracula from 1931, House of Frankenstein from 1944, and House of Dracula from 1945. The solo film is gonna be the subject of examination, mostly. From the film we learn that Count Dracula is a vampire, which is not a backstory at all. But from the novel we learn the exact same thing. So, yeah. Count Dracula is indeed a vampire. He is the only monster on this list with no backstory, but what he lacks in this department he makes up for in others. And it certainly doesn't mean he's a bad character. Listen to them. Children of the night. What music they make. The second pillar is called Scarometer. Is the well-dressed, charming but eccentric man with gracious manners scary? I don't think so, but never forget that still waters run deep. Abilities: All of them. Superhuman strength, superhuman speed, immortality, immunity to physical attacks, gravity defiance, teleportation, shape-shifting and hypnosis. If that wasn't enough, he doesn't cast a shadow or reflect in mirrors. Weaknesses: garlic, wolfbane, crucifix, daylight and wooden stake. He is also unable to enter a place unless invited. Count Dracula is pure evil. He will fist upon you, will make a literal Bloody Mary out of you or something worse. If the Invisible Man is only a man, this guy has all the powers, but to be honest, I'm not a big fan of vampires. He gets 0 out of 2 for legend, 0 out of 2 for scarometer, 2 out of 2 for abilities, 2 out of 2 for evilometer, and 1 out of 2 for verdict. Overall, Count Dracula gets 5 out of 10 and waltzes to number 4. Number 3 is Mr. Edward Hyde, also known as Dr. Henry Jekyll. Mr. Edward Hyde comes from the pages of Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde from 1886. It's an English novel written by Robert Louis Stevenson. He appears in UCM only once in Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde from 1913. From the film we learn, you know the drill, that Dr. Henry Jekyll is a chemist who undertakes a dangerous experiment, swallowing a drug intended to release his evil self, subsequently transforming himself to Mr. Edward Hyde. Interesting, good and evil, split personality. But from the novel we learn that Dr. Jekyll had indulged in his vices and feared discovery, so he found a way to transform himself and thereby do his shit undetected. This is how you write a backstory. Mr. Stevenson, good knock, sir. I like to imagine Mr. Hyde as a large hulking brute, and since Hulk from Marvel Comics is loosely based on those two, I think it's quite acceptable. Add the fact that he's also hunched and twisted and you'll get one creepy monster. Abilities: superhuman strength, weaknesses unknown. Mr. Edward Hyde is a complete maniac. When it comes to killing, he has no filter. Women, children, elderly, he can do unspeakable. He is very underrated and deserves more attention in my opinion. He gets 2 out of 2 for legend, 1 out of 2 for scarometer, 1 out of 2 for abilities, 2 out of 2 for evilometer, and 1 out of 2 for verdict. Overall, Mr. Edward Hyde gets 7 out of 10 and crashes at number 3. Number 2 is the Mummy, also known as Imhotep. Too far? The Mummy is another monster that comes from the pages of screenwriters. The story is so great I could have sworn it came from the novel. There are lots of Mummy sequels in UCM, but they focus on a different mummy named Charis. But we're gonna talk about Imhotep, who appears only in The Mummy from 1932, from which we learn that the Mummy is an ancient Egyptian high priest named Imhotep, who was buried alive in punishment for sacrilege. He attempted to resurrect his forbidden lover, Princess Ankh-Sunamun. With the power of Scroll of Thoth, which was buried with him, he is brought back to life. Once again, an original screenplay. Mummies are exotic zombies, and zombies are terrifying as they come. I don't know if it's just me, but when they are wrapped in bandages... Abilities: superhuman strength, immortality, immunity to physical attacks, necromancy, life energy absorption, plagues of Egypt manipulation, sandstorm creation and hypnosis. Weaknesses: cats. Just like the Phantom, the Mummy is a troubled romantic. He may sweep you out of the way without blinking an eye, but all he really wants is to revive his loved one. Sometimes I'm in the mood for Egyptian horror, sometimes I'm not. Beverly always is. He gets 2 out of 2 for legend, 2 out of 2 for scarometer, 2 out of 2 for abilities, 1 out of 2 for evilometer, and 1 out of 2 for verdict. Overall, the Mummy gets 8 out of 10 and shuffles to number 2. And number 1 is the Wolfman, also known as Lawrence Talbot. The Wolfman, once again, comes from the pages of screenwriters and appears in UCM 4 times. In The Wolfman from 1941, Frankenstein meets the Wolfman from 1943, House of Frankenstein from 1944, and House of Dracula from 1945. The upcoming narrative is gonna be backed up by the solo film, of sorts, from which we learn that the Wolfman is a man named Lawrence Talbot. One night he rescued a woman from a werewolf attack. While he killed the beast, he got bitten in the process. And since he who is bitten by a werewolf and lives will turn into one himself. Even a man who is pure in heart and says his prayers by night may become a wolf when a wolfbane blooms and the moon is full and bright. Universal popularized the crap out of werewolves. Even X-Men's Beast from Marvel Comics has werewolvian roots. Is a wolf scary? For sure. Is a man scary? No doubt. Is a werewolf scary? Well, they're guilty of the most severe cases of brick shit. Abilities: superhuman strength, superhuman speed, and lycanthropy. Weaknesses: silver. Just like Frankenstein's monster, the Wolfman is a victim of circumstance. But when he's in a werewolf mode, almost any encounter will be fatal. He will kill anything in his way. He is the scariest, the evilest, the awesomest monster on this list. He gets 1 out of 2 for legend, 2 out of 2 for scarometer, 2 out of 2 for abilities, 2 out of 2 for evilometer, and 2 out of 2 for verdict. Overall, the Wolfman gets 9 out of 10 and triumphs at number 1. If you want to check those guys out, make sure you do this during daylight. Grab a torch, a wooden stake gun, and don't forget your silver crucifix. If you don't own this stuff, no worries, I know a guy, A.V. Helsing, he'll take care of it. So yeah, that was my ranking of Universal Classic Monsters. Good night and good luck.